All right. So glad you are all here for this experiential breakout session with Ashlee Marie Preston, Living in Self-Sovereignty. I will speak for myself, but I'm sure the same is true for all of you, that I am super excited about this topic. It's something that I think about a lot and am excited to hear from the inimitable Ashlee Marie Preston, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give one anyway. So Ashlee is an acclaimed media personality, producer, and humanitarian. Also one of my favorite follows on Instagram, if you're not already doing that. She's historically the first trans person in the US to become editor-in-chief of a national publication and the first openly trans person to run for state office in California. Ashlee Marie facilitates transformative discourse that transmutes diverse perspectives into deeper understanding and intersectional partnerships that center on cross-cultural unity. That's a mouthful, but Ashlee's going to explain more about that in a second. In 2020, she launched youareessential.org, a national fund for benefiting grassroots organizations disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, the organization creates programming that supports the healing, growth, and sustainability of social movements. Ashlee Marie is co-chair of the Artists and Talent Peer Group of the Impact Guild and a legacy member of the Nexus Impact Society. She is also a TED alumna, has been featured in or on innumerable publications and networks, and is the recipient of countless awards and accolades, including Coca-Cola's Next Generation LGBTQ Leadership, the Blacklist 100 in 2020, and Power of Women's Changemakers 2021, just to name a few. Without further ado, Ashlee Marie, we're so glad you're here. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Ashlee Marie Preston, and full transparency as we come into the space, I just want to acknowledge that I am excited and scattered and all of these different things because I am a godmama now. A friend of mine actually went into early labor prematurely, actually at 30 weeks, and had triplets. And so I only had 2 hours of sleep. I rushed to the hospital. I was so excited, really just thinking about who these individuals are that I'm going to meet. And so immediately I went for Best Godmother of the Year. I got balloons that were non-gendered. It said, "Welcome, little ones." And, I did all of the things that we're supposed to do when we're thinking about how to be mindful of who these individuals are, independent of our expectations for their life, be they, well-intentioned. And in doing that, I immediately had to check myself because I started, I pulled their birth chart, first of all, immediately. And so I'm like, oh, okay, they're going to be Taurus, and this is like what their personality is, and this is what. And so, in many ways, although I didn't assume their gender and some of the assumptions that society makes based on who we are when we enter the world, I still found myself trying to essentially dream for someone else. And I think that that is an honest mistake that a lot of us have made at some point in our lives. People have made that mistake toward us. And so we're going to jump right into it to talk about what it means to be self-sovereign, and what it means to be able to live a life independent of outside influences and coercion. So I'm going to start by basically saying that self-sovereignty refers to the ability of an individual to make their own decisions and choices, as I said, independent of outside influence. This includes decisions about one's own body, fluidity, or flexibility in how they express their gender, their lifestyle, core beliefs, values, that sort of thing. The idea is that every individual has inherent worth and dignity and should be able to live their life as they see fit. And there is a caveat, obviously, that they're able to live their life as they see fit as long as they aren't presenting harm to another human being. And some may say that sounds a lot like autonomy. You know, we talk about autonomy a lot. So essentially self-sovereignty sounds like autonomy rebranded, but I would actually argue that self-sovereignty is a bit more ambitious than autonomy. You can think of self-sovereignty as autonomy through an intersectional lens. Most of the discourse that we have around autonomy typically centers on bodily autonomy, which addresses one's decisions around medical treatment, reproductive choices, end-of-life care, things like that. Whereas self-sovereignty in practice is capacious enough to be expressed in a variety of ways, including the choices that we make about our education, our career, relationships, spiritual beliefs, leisurely pastimes, whatever. But without the ability to exercise self-sovereignty, we often find ourselves trapped, powerless, or alienated from ourselves and others. Now, when we hear that, it sounds like the profile of someone who's vulnerable and who needs to be saved. However, seldom do we talk about the ways in which vulnerability is expressed as violence. So when we talk about someone feeling powerless or alienated, or we never think about the fact that the way that they respond to that is by lashing out. And this is often where bias, discrimination, and fear-based projections are formed. So the way that I think of it is that there's a deficit in a person's soul when they don't know who they are. They may find themselves overcompensating for that identity-shaped void by pretending to be so certain of who they become conditioned to believe they are. And that often looks like delegitimizing someone else's truth in the absence of their own. And so I think the part that many of us who joined today probably aren't prepared to talk about is the reality that we have also done this to others. And I think it's important to understand that accountability is the on-ramp toward living in self-sovereignty. When you think about politics, for instance, when you go out and you vote and there is an elected official who's sworn into office because of your vote, there is an expectation of accountability to the constituency. And so when we're thinking about self-sovereignty, there is also an expectation that we should have toward ourselves to be accountable, not only to how we treat ourselves, how we show up in the world, and how we give space for us to be exactly who we are, but there is, in practicing that accountability within ourselves, we then become better at becoming accountable to one another. When you think of harm, it's often rooted in fear, and it's fear that we'll never have enough or that will never be enough. And once we learn to confront those fears, we find that on the other side of it is a clearer understanding of who we truly are, and more importantly, what's meant for us. And I think that the reason why we want to talk about self-sovereignty is because we want to get to a place where not only we make our own decisions independent of outside influences that don't encourage us to betray ourselves and who we are, but self-sovereignty is about leaning into the life that is for us. I said it recently in a post on Instagram. I said, what's for me will find me, but in order for it to recognize me, I must be fully showing up as my most authentic self. And I think that oftentimes, that perception of self is cloaked in fear, masquerading as truth. And in fact, the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real. So I want to take a second and allow us to examine those fears and how they often block us from living in self-sovereignty. So in a moment, we're going to do breakout into a couple of small groups, which our tech support Pauline is going to help us coordinate. And in those groups, for those who are comfortable sharing, we are going to talk about 4 things. And don't worry, you're going to have a second. I'm not going to throw you in to the deep end. I'm going to actually walk through and model what it looks like in practice. So And then Pauline's going to also share these questions, these 4 questions that you'll be asking yourselves, and if comfortable, sharing with the group inside of the chat. So look out for that. So the first question that I typically ask is, how have I presented a barrier to someone else's ability to exercise self-sovereignty? And then you'll be sharing an example. The second question is, what was my reason for imposing or projecting my belief, view, or opinion onto that individual? The third question is, or task, is to identify the fear attached to that logic. The fourth one is, how can I build comfort, ease, and security around that fear? Now, I know some people are like, wait. I thought that this conversation on self-sovereignty was about how do I protect myself from people that impose themselves upon me. But in order for us to better understand what our definition of self-sovereignty is and what it looks like, we typically have to address and confront our own fears so that we can actually know what it is that we want and need in our lives to be happy. And I'm going to model that. So the first question, how have I presented a barrier to someone else's ability to exercise self-sovereignty? My example is my relationship with my younger sister. So I'm 38 and my younger sister is 33. And, you know, she has a very different way of doing life than I would do life. And as she's figuring it out, there are moments in which maybe a decision that she made it didn't yield the best outcome that she could have had. And then I end up, worrying or jumping in to try to, fix the situation or to help. And what I did was, the last time she called and was like, hey, I need a little bit of help with this because this didn't work out, this thing happened. Instead of being sensitive to how vulnerability is a superpower and respecting the fact that she trusted me enough to come to me to ask for help, I immediately started gently lambasting her, which is kind of like a contradiction, but I started lambasting her essentially about making better choices financially, about maybe thinking about different ways that she could support herself, and basically giving all of this unsolicited advice that she did not ask me for, which essentially started to affect the trust in the relationship. So number 2, what was my reason for imposing and projecting my belief, view, or opinion onto my sister? Well, my reason was because, unbeknownst to my sister, I had been undergoing a lot of financial stress because I'm at a large agency, and so this agency that reps me got this new talent that they signed on. And this new talent is more digestible to the public in society, especially as it pertains to trans issues and identity. And this person is, this person is willing to say and do things off script that I'm not willing to do or say. And because of that, I don't get the same kind of bookings and the same kind of opportunities as I used to, because living in self-sovereignty, I refuse to betray myself and my core values and beliefs. That being said, that fear that I had, in the background is that if you aren't doing things the way that I think you should be doing them, you're going to continue to keep making mistakes. And if you continue to keep making mistakes, I'm going to have to jump in and fix your mistakes. And I may not have as many resources as I would like to have to be able to support you. So that was the fear. That kind of bleeds into number 3. That's me identifying the fear attached to that logic. The fear in that logic is that if I show up as my most authentic self, if I say what needs to be said unapologetically and without reserve, if I go off script if I say the things that are true, but not necessarily popular, then I will no longer be able to support myself or my family. So the fourth one is, how can I build comfort, ease, and security around that fear? So what I have done is looked for opportunities to build community in spaces that champion my authenticity, the fullness of who I am. I have looked for opportunities to ask myself questions about who I am, because I think that seldom do many of us give way for evolution in our sense of identity. A lot of times we do so much work figuring out who we are and who we want to be and where we fit into the world that we forget not to be rigid in that identity. And the goal is not to have this well-branded, well-cemented identity so that we can be able to, use it as an identifier or use it in proximity to someone else's expectation of who we should be in the world. But identity is about freedom. It's about the flexibility and freedom of being able to evolve and grow and change and make different decisions and not being held to a standard that's no longer in service to your joy and well-being. So the other thing that I do to address the fear of not being able to have economic opportunities that support, my personal values is I build something new. So I've been reaching out to publications who I've worked with before. I reached out to a production team, and I actually have, and because of that, I have a TV show that we're about to go into production on that Hearst Media is co-executive producing. And now dreams that I didn't even know were possible are now coming to fruition and materializing because I had the courage to face the fear of not being able to sustain my livelihood while being authentic. And what that looked like was me judging my sister's life decisions and her inability to get it together and all of those things that had absolutely nothing to do with my sister. And because I was willing to be accountable to myself and to her, I was able to address the fear and come out on the other side of it, understanding that, wow, whereas my definition of self-sovereignty years ago would have been self-sovereignty is being able to show up as a trans woman in public spaces, not be judged, to be embraced. Self-sovereignty at that time, 20 years ago, almost when I transitioned, self-sovereignty would have been to be able to have a job where I can, do this or that, or to have friends that accepted me for me. But now at 38 years old, my definition of self-sovereignty is to be able to be exactly who I am, to speak uninhibited truths, and to be able to be taken care of economically and not have to compromise who I am. So with that being said, I hope that made sense for some of you. Does anyone have any questions before we go into the breakout sessions? Anything that I can clarify or? What did that FEAR acronym stand for again? It stood for false evidence appearing real. We often find ourselves in this place where the pressure, the anxiety, the stress of these scenarios often feel like facts. But in many times it's future projecting and thinking about what other people will think about us or will feel about us, or what the outcomes will be, when in reality, the fear is actually keeping us from walking through it to find out in the first place. So with that being said, thank you, Felicia, Teach Sis. So with that being said, Pauline's going to go ahead and help us by breaking us into small groups. And for those who feel comfortable, please share. You can take a minute or two if you need to answer those questions, and then feel free to share amongst one another. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the experience that we had in the breakout rooms. And for those who feel comfortable, they can share. And then we're going to take some questions. And at the end, I'm actually going to talk about some steps that we can take with us so that we can always be in practice of living in self-sovereignty. The breakout, that's a good question. The breakout is going to be 20 minutes. So you will have some time to actually think about it, share with one another, get feedback for those like who would like it, and then we'll come back together in 20 minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. I'm going to take a second to allow everyone to come back into the room.
Okay, everyone is back.
Awesome. So does anybody in particular feel comfortable sharing about their experience in the breakout, what they learned about themselves, or perhaps something that someone else may have shared that resonated with you deeply?
Feel free to unmute yourselves, or you can raise your hand or chat and we can read it.
I can share. What struck me in the breakout room was the similarity between our two experiences of disallowing other people their self-sovereignty was based on shutting ourselves down. And so it wasn't safe for us to express, so we weren't allowing other people to express.
That's powerful because it's so interesting. That is actually what, while you were in the breakout session, Pauline, Jordan, and a couple of other people, we were talking about that same specific thing, that when you think about what, bias or discrimination or all of those things are rooted in, it's typically rooted in the reality that your strong sense of self is intimidating, and it's a threat to my ability to continue to live in the inauthentic state that I'm in, and there's a lot of fear in seeking truth, and seeking out who we are. And not only is there a great deal of fear, oftentimes there's consequence and punishment to that. And so that bravery and that courage to, no matter what, make space for your most authentic self to come forward, that sometimes serves as a mirror to someone else's fear of what may happen if they were to do the same. So thank you so much for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share their experience, perhaps what they shared, what they found interesting, what they've learned?
I had the thought that, given the nature of, we think we don't want our self-sovereignty taken, it's actually difficult to recognize. It's hard for me to find a situation. I had to really search. If you hadn't said little sister, I wouldn't have had an example, because I was, not that I think I just can't identify it as well. It's hard to see. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of it when you're, anyway.
No, that was, no. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it was so funny. Pauline was like, oh, that was almost like I forget the exact phrasing, but almost like a move, like a special
ninja.
Yeah, it was a special move, because what I realized was that I had, again, part of self-sovereignty, again, is practicing accountability within myself and recognizing that it's not just about what's happening to me, but about what I allow to happen. And in the allowance of that thing that's happening, on the other side of it, I guess, let me rewind. Before I can, understand what self-sovereignty means to me, I need to be able to, it's almost easy in my neurofestive state. I'm someone who, you know, on the spectrum for autism, ADHD, like I have like so much an alphabet soup of things that I just call it neurofestivity. And so sometimes it takes me a while to like arrive to these, whereas someone can come through the front door and have this understanding, I have to come through the back door, go through the basement, climb out the window, and then come all the way to the front. And even though sometimes it's not always the most practical, it's my way and it works. And so in this instance, this was something that I didn't even expect to happen, that like in understanding how I have participated in the culture of denying people self-sovereignty, that I would, on the other end, by walking through those fears, be able to see that the thing that I was afraid of was a deficit that I have the power to make whole, you know? And so for those who were here, the example for me was giving my sister unsolicited advice that she didn't ask for. She asked for help. She asked for support. She was vulnerable enough to be honest about what she needed. And I wasn't able to just simply give it to her because I was allowing myself to be driven by 100 forms of fear. And then in finding out the thing that I was afraid of, that's when I was like, oh, wow, now this makes so much sense. My fear isn't that my sister can't get it together, that she can't figure out her life, that she can't. My fear is that I'm not going to be able to sustain or support myself, let alone my sister, because I'm being pulled to show up in a way, in a much more authentic way than I previously have. And because I refuse to betray myself in the ways that some of us do in the entertainment and media space, because we have to survive, there's no judgment to it, it just is what it is. But I chose a different path. And I had to basically learn that in that path, I have power. In my self-sovereignty, what would it look like for me to be able to, you know, find security and support in being authentic? So is there anyone else that wanted to briefly possibly share about, you know, what they learned, take away? No pressure, of course, but anyone else that...
One of the things that I didn't say it in the breakout room, but it was something that like came into my head and I thought, oh, I don't like that, was that I didn't, one of the things, the big things that I've had to unlearn over the last few years that I'm still working on every day, and sometimes I don't get very far, is sort of the way that I was raised and like what was sort of instilled in me, that me having autonomy depended on other people not having it, or the power to take other people's away. It's a big one to think about.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that that is, you know, I think that that's by design. There are systems that are solely predicated on the ability to suppress, you know, someone else's ability to have access and dignity or sense of safety. And so the thing that I always talk about, even as a Black trans woman, the truth is that, you know, in the activist space, sometimes we're always talking about what it's like to dismantle these systems, but dismantling systems will do nothing if we haven't uprooted the actual, like, you know, the fact of the matter is that those seeds are planted within our hearts and our minds. And so until we're actually able to look at the ways in which we continue to play out the conditioning, then we're always going to continue to see the same things that we see. And I think many of us, you know, there's a term I often use called lateral oppression. And so there's this idea that just because I am someone of a marginalized experience doesn't mean that I somehow can't mirror that marginalization or parrot that back towards someone else. And the truth is, it's sometimes more likely to happen within our specific communities. You know, I talk about racism, sexism, and transphobia within the LGBTQ community. I talk about, you know, all of these different, you know, these different areas that we often miss, because I think that we see ourselves outside of systems and socialization and not really looking at the role that we play in upholding it. And it doesn't, I try to remove the binary or of good or bad, right or wrong, but just to be able to see it as this is what it is. And the beauty is in exercising my self-sovereignty, I can't control how other people show up to the conversation or what they're willing to do or not do, but I can work on my own healing. And when I heal myself, I can help heal others who are willing participants, and then collectively we can heal the planet. So that's always been my formula. So thank you for sharing that. We have like 5 minutes left. Is there anyone else who has anything that they wanted to share or that they learned? Any questions? Does anyone have any questions?
The description of the breakout, it says self-sovereignty is predicated on one's ability to make decisions and act upon them. Could you speak a little bit about making the connection for us? I think it was a really good, like, kind of reverse engineering sort of, like you really get a lot of, I actually want to try that in other aspects of my life, but how can you say something to make the connection about making your own decisions and how this pulls into what you were talking about?
That is actually right on. So yeah, so basically, I guess we can go ahead and this will answer your question. But so, I closed okay, there we go. So to wrap up, basically, to bring it home for everyone, self-sovereignty is a crucial aspect of human dignity and well-being. It allows individuals to express our unique identity and values and to pursue our own goals and aspirations. However, self-sovereignty must be balanced with collective values, and it must be exercised responsibly in consideration of the rights and needs of others. And so to the question that you just asked, I want to just first say, first and foremost, living a life of self-sovereignty doesn't happen overnight, but there are some tips to get started. So we're going to put those tips in the chat, and then I'm also going to go through them. So the first one is to practice self-reflection. Take some time to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Consider what brings you joy and fulfillment and what makes you feel uneasy or happy or unhappy, because in those sometimes is where you find the actual thing you were searching for all along. 2, identify your values. Think about what values are most important to you, such as honesty, compassion, or creativity. Aligning your actions and decisions with your values can help you feel more authentic. 3, challenge limiting beliefs. It's common to have limiting beliefs that hold us back from being our most authentic selves. So pay attention to any negative self-talk or beliefs that you may have and challenge them with positive affirmations or evidence that contradicts them. Remember, I said fear is false evidence appearing real. So in this step, it's an opportunity to be able to get a better grasp on what's real and what isn't in that moment. 4, embrace your uniqueness. Recognize that your individuality is what makes you special. Embrace your quirks, interests, and talents, even if they don't fit into societal norms or expectations. And 5, explore your passions. Engaging in activities that you are passionate about can help you connect with your most authentic self. Try new things and don't be afraid to pursue your interest. Now, in writing this, it was really difficult for me at first because I wanted to be very careful with how to tell people exactly how to live in self-sovereignty, because I think that that's how we accidentally go down the rabbit hole of betraying ourselves or not thinking or moving or working in ways that feel authentic to us, is if we start out by taking someone else's blueprint for what it means to be able to, these kind of just add water approaches to joy and happiness and well-being, they oftentimes leave us feeling empty and they do nothing to address the deficit, the soul deficit, because we're still looking for other people to do the work for us of being able to explore what brings us joy and a sense of wholeness. So I just want to just thank everyone for showing up to be a part of this conversation, and really more than anything, just remind us to remember that self-sovereignty is a process. It does take time and effort, but more than anything, just to be patient and kind with yourself, and don't be afraid to seek support from others along the way. And more importantly, don't be afraid to ask yourself questions that take a while to answer. And I think that we live, again, in a just add water society where the idea is somebody's holding the secret. Somebody has that magic red pill, blue pill, that thing. Someone has something that I don't have. And I think that, again, the idea of self-sovereignty is realizing that you don't have to outsource your happiness and your joy. You have the answers within you, and you are the expert on your own life experience. No one knows better than you. It's about an exercise and asking yourself the right questions to bring forth the truths around what makes you happy and what brings you joy. And more importantly, thinking about self outside of the expectations of others. You know, we are more than mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, cousins, employees, colleagues, boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, all of these different things. All of those things are in service to someone else's experience. But self-sovereignty is about identifying self without fulfilling expectations of others, if that makes any sense. So thank y'all so much. I think my time is up. Yeah, if nobody has anything else, I guess then I can turn it back over to Jordan and Pauline.
Amazing. Thank you, Ashlee. That was so wonderful.
Thank you so much
for being here and for spending your time with us today. We'll see you tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be just as enriched and nourished as we were today. Ashlee, again, you're the best. This was so wonderful. Hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you so much.
All right.